It's your Tuesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a good one out there as well. And a lot of good stuff coming up on today's show. Bobby Nightengale from the Star Tribune joins me here in just a little bit to talk Twins. He's down in Florida, of course, for spring training. Spring game started in just like 3 days. The Twins play the Gophers, I think, and then Pittsburgh right after that this weekend. So they are getting on the field soon. Byron Buxton sounds optimistic. Stop me if you've heard that before, but it sounds like a little bit more like fact-based optimism than just optimism for the sake of, hey, we got to try something new this year. So we'll see how far that gets them this year. But Bobby and I will talk about that a lot more here in just a little bit. Minnesota United closing in on their next head coach. Sounds like the youngest coach in Major League Soccer by quite some stretch. Timberwolves news, signing an extension with Mike Conley Jr., their point guard, for 2 more years. That's interesting to me, so I'll get to that in a minute. First, though, what I miss, gotta start with the Wild. It's a no-brainer, even though I had some friends this morning jokingly text me already saying that I'm going to lead with the Wolves today because I always love to talk about the Wolves. Not even I could do that. I had an editor many years ago when I was first starting out in this business. I came back from an assignment breathlessly, and I was like, I've got great stuff. I've got all this material. Like, the story will practically write itself. And he sarcastically said to me, well, having the story write itself will be better than having you write it. But love that line. That line has stuck with me. He didn't really mean it. It was just a good line. And I was learning still at that time. And so I had some work to do to polish around the edges. But, I teach a journalism class at the U of M in addition to working at the Star Tribune. It's just kind of a fun adjunct job. I teach it once a year. It's just a spring semester class. And one thing I always tell my students is you need to obviously always be looking for the best story, but sometimes you just need to get out of the way. Sometimes the story will be so obvious to you that you know exactly what to do. You just tell me the facts, tell me everything that happened, because the facts themselves, everything that happened, does not demand you to just write it in a certain way. Just tell me everything that happened. That's exciting enough, and that is what feels like happened in this Wild game on Monday. They beat Vancouver 10-7. 10-7. Monday afternoon. It's a matinee game. Weird, wonderful, wild, no pun intended game where they're trailing 5-2 late in the second period. And then Matt Zuccarello gets a power play goal. And you're like, okay, 5-3 gives them a chance going into the third period. But still, they're playing Vancouver. Vancouver's the best team, points-wise at least, in the entire NHL. They have 80 points. No team has more points than Vancouver this year. So you're like, okay, Vancouver, high-scoring offense, probably going to put them away in the third period. Nice try, Wild. You're trying to get back in the playoff race, but this is where it ends. But, bam, right away in the third period, Joel Eriksson Ek, power play goal is 29 seconds, and all of a sudden it's 5-4. You're like, okay, this is getting interesting. You barely have time to digest that goal. Kaprizov scores in the power play. Now the game is tied at 1:23 of the third period. You're like, hey, great. 21 seconds later, Eriksson Ek again on the power play. Now the Wild have the lead. 3 minutes later, Marco Rossi scores. 24 seconds after that, Kaprizov again. Suddenly a 5-2 deficit in a matter of like 6 on-ice minutes has gone from a 5-2 deficit to an 8-5 lead. Now, the craziness wasn't done. Vancouver rallied. They got 2 in the next 10, 12 minutes to get it to 8-7, but the Wild get 2 empty net goals at the end, including Kaprizov with 2 seconds left to cap his hat trick. Kaprizov has a hat trick. Eriksson Ek has a hat trick. Both of them have 3 goals and 3 assists. Feels like one of those games where big offensive game in baseball where someone gets 8 RBIs out of nowhere, so the team wins 17-4, and all of a sudden their stats look that much better. Kaprizov's got 23 goals now. Eriksson Ek has 28 goals this season. All of a sudden you have one of these monster games, and it accounts for scoring for a week. The Wild scored 10 goals in this game. They've gone 10 days without scoring that many goals sometimes this year. Just a crazy, crazy game, especially when you consider this. I was trying to figure out how to best define how crazy this game was. And I was thinking about it, the Vikings won a game 3-0 earlier this year. 3-0. That was actually their last win this year, by the way, in case you forgot that. 3-0 win in Vegas. That was their last win of the season as they kind of fell apart down the stretch. The Wild just scored had 14 more points. Let's just call them points, everything being equal. 14 more points, 17 total points in this game, 3 in that game. And you only get 1 per goal, right? It only marks 1 in football. You get 3 for a field goal, 7 for a touchdown and an extra point. If this was football and these were all touchdowns, the final score would be 70-49. I mean, just think about that. This would have been this is a crazy, crazy game. 10-7. Didn't even need an overturned punt return from Iowa to win this game 10-7. It's just it's an amazing final score. It's an amazing performance. Sounds like the Wild, feeling good about themselves right now. Don't have a whole lot of time to savor this one because they've got the Jets right away again today. Could be an emotional game. A lot of history with the Jets. That's where Kaprizov was hurt last year. Really hurt them down the stretch. He wasn't the same the rest of the year and into the playoffs, even when he came back healthy. So not a lot of time to enjoy this one as they're still pushing for that playoff spot. But man, 10-7. You will not see a game like this. I don't know when the next time you'll see a game like this is, so you do have to savor it to some degree. And now, yes, we will talk Wolves for a few minutes. Signing Mike Conley Jr. to a 2-year extension. Interesting move. I like it on its face. I mean, this is a guy who's been great for them ever since he came over in the trade at the deadline last year. It's been such a good fit. A great trade, by the way. I think I'm going to write about this more today. But Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker coming over along with 3 second-round picks for D'Angelo Russell. Russell's been good for the Lakers in a lot of stretches. He's on a heater right now. That seemed like it helped the Lakers. Certainly helped the Wolves, though. Both those players have been, you got a starter and a rotation guy and a lot of, draft capital out of it. The thing with Conley is you looked at it and you're like, okay, he came into this year on an expiring contract. The Wolves are going to have some salary cap crunches into next year for sure once Ant's big contract starts, once Towns Supermax kicks in. You got Gobert still in the books. You signed Jaden McDaniels to a big contract this offseason. You've got a lot of things going on, and you're like, okay, well, Conley's an expiring. Is that where you kind of make up the difference? But then Conley's been so good this year. The extension they signed him to, Chris Hine reporting, 2 years, a little under $21 million total. That's less than he's making right now, kind of reflective of kind of the stage of his career that he's at. He's such a good fit. It's a bargain relatively for point guard stability. So in that case, in that regard, you've solved your issue at point guard, right? If you treated Conley like an expiring contract, you wouldn't have a point guard next year, which is a problem, right? But now you have this issue where you've got an extra, $10-12 million on the books for next year. How do you account for that now that you have all these other contracts kicking in? So it still feels like something has to give, or this team goes on a big playoff run, and or they decide that this team is worth building around. They go into the luxury tax, things like that. So there's possibilities, different options for next year based on where they're at. But interesting to me that they decided to do this so soon. Almost had to, though, just in terms of how this all fits together. You're not going to be able to draft a point guard, I wouldn't think, at least not someone who so seamlessly fits in, and you wouldn't get a point guard who fits as well as Conley for the price. So it makes sense. The only thing about it that doesn't make sense to a certain degree is where they sit with the salary cap going into the next year and how this will all fit together once everything is said and done. But in terms of on the court, Conley's been amazing. Tim Conley's had a great run here of good, shrewd moves. You got to like where they're at right now with all the stuff they've been doing. So yeah, it's just worrying about the future. That'll take care of itself, I guess. There's ways to get around it. You can get out of that box when you need to, but having Conley in the fold for the next 2 years after this feels like it adds some stability, even if it will make their contract situation after this season a little bit more tricky with some of those other guys.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino, let your story begin.
Let's bring in Bobby Nightengale from the Star Tribune right now. He is down in Florida, in Fort Myers, covering your first spring training, I guess. Wouldn't this be, Bobby?
Yeah, first one in Florida. Had 5 years in Arizona, and now first one getting to see the Florida traffic. Haven't had to do the Florida road trips that I've heard about, the 2-hour drives, but I'm sure that that's kind of around the corner.
There is a legend of Florida Man. Have you run into any Florida Man candidates down there so far?
Not yet, but one of the restaurants we went to, there's like a Snoop Dogg figurine that they
Okay.
have kind of by the host stand, and apparently it got stolen and returned. So that was kind of the first introduction to a Florida restaurant.
Welcome to Florida moment for you. Well, you're down there covering the Twins, of course. You joined the beat kind of midstream last year, getting a chance at a full year right now, and some interesting storylines kind of already so far. The Twins will start playing, preseason games, exhibition games in just a few days here. They play the Gophers on Friday, right? And then the Pirates on Saturday. And sounds like we're going to see Byron Buxton in center field. Sounds like all systems go at this point.
Yeah, and obviously that's probably the talk every year is he's feeling better in center and hopes to play center, but it does seem legitimate. Seen him run around. I haven't seen him take fly balls yet. That's the next step. He admitted he's kind of nervous for it, just hasn't really done it very much in the past year and a half. Hasn't played center field in a major league game since August 2022. So been quite a while, but Rocco Baldelli said first week of spring games. He's being eased in just a little bit just to make sure everything's all systems go. But first week of spring training games, he's going to start in center field, which is a big step because, last spring he was the DH at this time. And, the goal was eventually he's going to be able to play center. And that never happened. Whereas, from the get-go, they're saying he's going to play center. And, this is probably as upbeat as, I've only been on the beat for half a season and an off season, but most upbeat I've seen Byron Buxton and a lot of veteran beat writers, Phil Miller and other guys say, this is kind of what he was years ago. The pain in his knee's gone. He said it was kind of like waking up with a knife in his knee every morning is what last year was like. And going through that experience, he was happy he survived a season with it, happy he tried to play because he got to be a part of a playoff team. But with the pain gone, a happier guy. You can tell he has center field in his sights, and he's excited to play there. Just felt like he was too young to be a full-time DH. So, and for the Twins, obviously that's game-changing potential if his defense is there.
Remind me of, it didn't seem like the procedure he had was all that major. If he can kind of come back right away and be on the field again, it seems like something small that might have made a significant difference.
Yeah, it sounded like I'm trying to think of the specific term, like the plica or placa,
Okay.
part of a knee, but I think it's just a major irritant because I've seen other people when Byron Buxton talked about after having the surgery how he felt. I've seen other people on social media say I had the same procedure, and that's exactly how I would describe it. So I think it's just one of those. It wasn't a major knee surgery. It was almost like arthroscopic in nature, but one that just kind of got rid of the pain that he had been feeling and the one that cost him playing center field all of last year.
Like you mentioned, big deal if he can be healthy for himself, obviously for the kind of arc of his career, but also the Twins. Like it feels like, again, that's been a storyline for so many different springs, but if he is healthy, like you forget about last year, like they did everything they did without a healthy Byron Buxton, with him, DHing and not being 100% effective. And by the end of the year, he was, down close to 200 batting average wise. I know he carried them at certain points of the season offensively with his power, but you'd had a season where Carlos Correa wasn't at his best. You started to see some of his best in the postseason. You didn't get a full year out of Royce Lewis. Like that's got to be a lot of their optimism right now, right? It's not just, it's not so much what they've added. They've certainly subtracted from the pitching staff, but what they could add just internally from those three guys and beyond that is probably is where a lot of this optimism they have has to be coming from.
Definitely. I think it's one of those, you look at what the offense did, especially in the second half, and you're like, half of that time, Royce Lewis was healthy. The other half, he wasn't. Byron Buxton wasn't healthy at all during that time. Carlos Correa was, having the worst offensive season of his career. So it's like, if those three guys, I don't think there's anyone saying that Byron Buxton's going to play 150 plus games. But just 100 games and 80 of those in center field would go a huge way in terms of what the offense could do. Carlos Correa changed his swing, and hitting coach David Popkins said he was hitting balls over the batter's eye. And he's like, I've never seen that working with him the last 2 years. So, I think there's a lot of excitement in terms of that, in terms of their best players are healthy. Offensive position players are healthy. So, I mean, if those guys can stay healthy, which is always a question for every team, but those guys have a track record, I think, of not so much Royce Lewis, but Carlos Correa has been a guy who's been top 5 in the MVP votes. Byron Buxton, when he's healthy, certainly could be an MVP candidate if he could do that for an entire season. So I think if you subtract the pitching staff, if that takes a small step back, which there's optimism that they won't have to take a major step back. But if they do, the offense is the one that's going to be asked to carry more, and they're confident it will.
Now, Correa altered his swing somewhat last year away from what had been successful for him, but a lot of that was to compensate for the pain, right?
Yeah, that was the main thing. I talked to David Popkins, and he said basically made it sound like he's a guy who likes to be on, weight distributed evenly in his feet and standing up tall, but the pain was kind of forcing him to be more on his toes, leaning forward, and he couldn't stand up as tall. And it was almost like, it's just a human body. I mean, you don't want to be in painful positions while standing up there, getting ready to swing. And he grinded through the entire season. You have to give him credit for that. But you can tell he's in a much better mood. It's almost like the way he talks is all really matter of fact in terms of like, I'm going to have a better year. I changed my swing and it's going to work. And so far, so good. I mean, and I know it's early in camp, sub spring training games to do it, but he said it's a swing that he's had in the past in Houston and a lot more direct to the ball, a lot more compact, more simple. And he just says expect more line drives and, expect him to hit the ball harder.
You mentioned the pitching staff. I saw you wrote recently about Joe Ryan. He's a guy that I'm pretty interested in right now because feels like, again, that's a possibility for them to take a step forward, or they need him to take another more consistent step forward if they're going to succeed this year. Where do you see him kind of fitting in? Where's he at right now?
I mean, I think if he's at his best, he's your number 2 starter right after Pablo Lopez. You see what he did in the first half. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball. His ERA was below 2.5. So there was a lot of excitement about what he did, especially in the first half. Obviously, it kind of fell off a cliff for him performance-wise. He kind of tried to pitch through an injury, didn't tell the team about it for a month. As his performance suffered, and then when he came back, he really wasn't the same guy. And he admits it was a learning lesson. Has things to communicate in the future. But he did a lot of work in the offseason about just trying to make sure his body's better, his routine isn't so beholden to one strict routine. He's allowed to change himself a little bit more, and he's confident. I mean, he's shown. I asked him, like, with Sonny Gray gone, do you feel like you have to do more? And he goes, well, in the first half, I did exactly, what more could they want from me? And so I think that's kind of the exciting thing for him and the Twins is just saying, okay, if he just has to be what he did in the first half and do that consistently for a full season. Obviously easier said than done, but I think it's exciting that he's already kind of shown he can prove it for months at a stretch compared to like a Louis Varland, who you're hoping takes the next step. Joe Ryan's already taken that step. It's just a matter of being more consistent.
Where do we think Louis winds up? Speaking of Louis, this is a good transition to starter, bullpen. I want to talk bullpen here in a bit, but is he slated for back end of the rotation or 8th inning, or where do you think he's headed?
I think right now rotation depth. I mean, I feel like they got fortunate last year. They only needed really 8 starters, and there are some teams that need 10 to 15 starters to get through an entire season. So I don't think they want to give up that starting depth off the bat. There's always the option, like midseason, if things are going extremely well, if the depth is, everyone's healthy, everyone's holding up, then you can move him to the bullpen, and he's shown he can have success there. So I almost feel like it's like, okay, let him start, give him that challenge, see where he can take it. Because if he takes the next step as a starter and, everything panned out there, you'd rather have him starting than a bullpen guy. But that's always there to fall back on. And I feel like that's the way they're approaching it, is saying, if things work out midsummer, you can always adjust that plan. You kind of know what you have for him in the bullpen. Right now, let's find out what you have in him as a starter.
I suppose some of that, too, could depend on what the rest of the bullpen looks like. And they've got a lot of candidates. They added some arms, kind of a flurry of arms in, January, early February. Those are maybe the jobs that are up for grabs, or maybe some of the things that we don't know about yet, right? As camp unfolds, like how are these guys going to look? Who might win, kind of those 5th, 6th, 7th spots in the bullpen, right?
Yeah, I mean, you still have your core, Duran, Griffin Jacks, Caleb Thielbar, Brock Stewart. That's probably your core 4. Justin Topa was kind of a back end guy for the Mariners. He was involved in the Jorge Polanco trade. Wouldn't be surprised if he was another alternate for that. And then you kind of have the bunch they added. Josh Staumont from the Royals. When he's really good, he's throwing 100 miles an hour, and he showed in the division how good he could be a few years ago before injuries got to him. Jay Jackson, they signed to a 1-year deal. They're excited about what he kind of provides. He had a good year last year, kind of like I think it was a 2.12 ERA in 20-some appearances. More of a middle reliever, but someone you don't sign those guys to a 1-year guaranteed contract if you don't think they can contribute. Steven Okert, they got in the Nick Gordon trade. He's out of options. So right now he's slated for the bullpen. Otherwise he has to go through waivers to stay in the organization. So they have options. I think that was kind of the one thing they wanted to do. Obviously there's injuries every camp, especially relievers. But I feel like there's more depth. I mean, you look at projections, they're slated to be one of the top bullpens in the American League. And, if the starting rotation takes a step back, that means more innings for the bullpen. And I feel like they feel like they have more weapons there.
Is that kind of their philosophy right now? The organizational bullpen philosophy is, you got to have some things you can count on, but they're going to maybe, roll the dice and kind of see out of a bunch of candidates, lower cost candidates who can make the team. I mean, they've had success with the guys like Brock Stewart. When it works to great effect.
Yeah, I think they view it as if you can't keep everyone, that's okay too. To just take the best group. I mean, I remember wasn't covering the Twins last spring, but the names they had. I mean, you look at like Trevor McGill ended up going to the Brewers, and I think he stayed up the entire season for them. They had Jeff Hoffman as a non-roster guy, and he ended up being like a 8th inning guy for the Philadelphia Phillies. So I think they view it as too much depth in spring is a good thing because it protects you against injuries, and you still get your choice of them at the end of camp when those tough decisions have to be made.
You talked a little bit about projections right now for some of these guys, and for overall projections, you look at FanGraphs, they're pretty high on the Twins. Now, some of that is relative to what else is in the AL Central. I think they maybe got the Twins at like 85 wins, and the win totals aren't so important so much as kind of where everybody sorts out, but they've got them, 4 or 5 games clear of anybody else in the division, kind of like we saw a lot of last year. Is that kind of their mentality right now, that they feel like this is their division still, this is their time to kind of take another step there and kind of hold on to this thing for another year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think talking to players, I think it's almost just like, we got a taste of the postseason last year. Now it's time to take that next step. I mean, it's one of those, I feel like it's more talked about in the NBA, but you have to learn how to win to take that next step. And they feel like, okay, we took that first step. We got a taste of it. We won a playoff series, got that monkey off our back. Now it's a chance to, use that experience in a better way and go around further at least. So, I think expectations are higher. I think they expect to win the division, definitely. And then they feel like, the core of the roster is still there. I mean, we've mentioned the big three with Buxton, Correa, and Lewis, but I mean, you look at the young guys too, like Edward Julian could take another step forward. Matt Wallner, Alex Kirilloff showed some good things last year. So, I mean, I think they look at it as they have a good mix of young guys, a good mix of veterans, all with playoff experience, and they think no reason to they shouldn't be better than they were last year.
Royal Credit Union's smart checking accounts offer no monthly fees and no minimum balance. Enjoy financial freedom when you open your Royal Credit Union smart checking account online at rcu.org/go-checking. Insured by NCUA.
And they signed a veteran, Carlos Santana. Now, he might eat into the at-bats of various people. And one guy you mentioned before we started recording that I had frankly not completely forgotten about, but a guy that was kind of off my radar because he missed so much time last year, Jose Miranda. Where do you think he fits in this year? It sounds like he's still kind of coming back from whatever's ailing him, but he was a guy they had penciled in at third base based on how well he hit in 2022 as a rookie. Where do you think he is right now, and how much could he potentially help them if he's healthy?
Yeah, I think right now he's probably on the outside of the bubble looking in. He dealt with a shoulder injury in spring training last year, and it derailed his entire season. Probably affected his swing, definitely affected his throwing. He's not throwing right now in camp, so kind of a first base /DH right now. Beginning of spring training games, Rocco Baldelli said he's just going to be a DH only. Yeah, I mean, he's the downside of all the young guys. I mean, you probably felt as good about him as you felt about like Edward Julian going into this year, thinking he'd be the cornerstone, if not at third base, that he'd just flip over to first base, but no matter what, he'd keep hitting. And then when his hitting dried up, that took away some opportunities for him. I think Carlos Santana fills the same role he does. I mean, Carlos Santana crushes left-handed pitching, so he's going to start against lefties. And Carlos Santana plays close to Gold Glove defense. So there's at bats at DH, especially if Byron Buxton can play regularly in center field. But I think they will add a right-handed hitter at some point in spring training, kind of, especially an outfielder. There was one that Matt Wallner didn't really start against left-handed pitching last year, and they don't really have that for the outfield. Maybe Willie Castro, but they don't have like a specific starter for that starting against lefties in the outfield. So I wouldn't be surprised if they added that, which would make Jose Miranda more of a candidate to start the year in AAA. But he's good depth for first base. I mean, if Alex Kirilloff has an injury, if Carlos Santana isn't performing up to what he has done in the past, you do have Jose Miranda, and the upside's there. But he has to prove he's healthy.
You mentioned maybe going out and getting another right-handed bat, maybe one that can play the outfield. Is that kind of the last, not to say huge move, but the last like significant move that could impact the 25-man roster that you still think is yet to come, or is there anything else that you could see happening, between now and opening day?
I think there's a possibility they add a starting pitcher. You can never have too much starting pitching depth, and there's just frankly a lot of free agents still out there. Ones that, like you look at like the free agent market, like not even the Blake Snells and the Jordan Montgomerys, but, like Michael Lorenzen was an all-star last year and is kind of in that middle tier starting pitcher. So I do think they have not a ton of money to work around after they got the TV deal done. And, their payroll is a little bit lower than it was when they had Jorge Polanco after that trade. And, losing some guys during the offseason. So I do think there's not a ton of money, but some money to spend in terms of adding to the roster. I think right-handed outfielder is the one they definitely want to do. Just that market really hasn't changed, whether that's Michael A. Taylor coming back or Adam Duvall or Tommy Pham. There's some options there that haven't made decisions yet, but I see the Twins trying on one-year deals to get a couple things done that could affect the 26-man roster.
A lot of 26 man. Thanks for correcting me on 25. It used to be 25. It's a lot of free agents still out there, much to Commissioner Rob Manfred's chagrin. That was one thing he talked about the other day, right? Was in addition to the kind of this push for TV in the future, like, hey, we want to have this kind of like hot stove concentrated time in December, maybe bleeding into January, where all the action is happening, and it just isn't happening now because teams recognize the value of cheaper contracts, things like that, and there's just the market has just changed from what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think partially it was a worse free agent market. I mean, you had Ohtani and Yamamoto from Japan, that kind of the top guys that they really got paid. But I don't think there was the middle tier that was as strong as maybe a couple years ago. I mean, even last year, you look at like Carlos Correa, Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, Dansby Swanson. I mean, there was a lot of options at shortstop and other positions. Cody Bellinger was a free agent last year. So I felt like there was more options there. Rob Manfred suggested, trying to set some sort of deadline and trying to make it more like the NFL and NBA where you have that frenzy. But the problem with MLB is you don't have a salary cap. So, you can force movement in those sports because there's only a limited amount of dollars that go around. And, if a team doesn't have enough salary cap to sign you, you have to move on, where baseball, it feels like it keeps changing. I mean, TV deals, you look at like the Rangers and the Guardians, they thought they were going to lose their TV deals. They ended up keeping it at a reduced rate. So, that affected their plans. So, it seems like it's always a moving target. You wish rosters were more set in for spring training just to get fans a little bit more excited. I mean, some fan base is going to be excited when they get Blake Snell and Cody Bellinger and Jordan Montgomery during spring training, but you wish it was a little bit more set just for the sport. They're too good at players not to be signed somewhere.
Very true. Final thing for you, Bobby. Like I said, they play in just a few days here. Anything in particular you're looking forward to seeing? Just, we've been talking about things for months. You've been seeing things, off to the side for weeks now. Anything you're looking forward to once the spring games actually start?
But I mean, Byron Buxton in center field, that'll be the big one we're all watching just because he didn't do it at all last year. I'm excited to see, the top pitchers too. I mean, Pablo Lopez, he's worked on a few things during the offseason. He wants to be able to throw his sweepy slider a little bit better than he did last year. And he talked about it, it was a new pitch for him last year. It kind of changed his career. But he was kind of like, I learned it in spring training last year and kind of just survived the season. He's like, now I had a whole offseason to work on what I actually want to do with it. So him taking another step could be exciting. Joan Duran was throwing 101 in his first live batting practice session in mid-February. And so that'll tick up as the season progresses. So excited to see where his progress is too. I mean, easy to forget how good he was in his first full season as a closer. Now it's a chance for him to see if he can take a next step in terms of being, one of the elite closers in the game now.
Do we need to start putting like restrictor plates on these pitchers like they do in NASCAR so they can't throw so they can't get up to like 110, 115? It feels like it's unfair at a certain point.
You would think there's like a limit coming at some point. Like I remember when Aroldis Chapman started doing it and it's like, okay, how much higher can we go? And it's still ticking up. Guys somehow keep finding a way to squeeze out an extra mile an hour. Wouldn't want to be a hitter anymore these days.
No, maybe they got to move the mound back at some point. They're talking about that, I guess, but we will see. Probably not going to happen this year anyway. There's plenty of other stuff to look forward to, though. Follow Bobby Nightengale's coverage, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, and Bobby, I'm sure we'll check in again soon.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Mike.
Good stuff from Bobby as usual, and I'll put a plug in for our colleague Phil Miller. Enjoyed his story on relief pitcher Jeff Brigham, former teammate of Pablo Lopez, a minor league teammate of Pablo Lopez, the Twins ace. Guy trying to make the Twins, got a non-guaranteed spring contract, but he's had some success in the past trying to reinvent himself now that his velocity is a little bit down after some injury problems. But Phil's story is just really fascinating, just to look at what the Twins did to help Pablo Lopez, how they convinced Brigham to come here, how they feel like they can show him some things that will help him. Just the whole process. It was an interesting look behind the scenes of how these things kind of come together, how a guy decides where to go when he doesn't have a guaranteed deal, things like that. Go read that story, because I learned a lot from that story, both on what the Twins do, how other players view the Twins, things like that. So go check that out, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. Let's finish with the cooler. There'll be more on this, I believe, on Wednesday's show. Expecting to have Lavelle E. Neal III, Star Tribune columnist, on with me. We'll talk about this more, but Minnesota United closing in on just their second head coach in their 8-year history. Sounds like they are targeting Manchester United assistant coach Eric Ramsey. 32 years old, would be by far the youngest head coach in Major League Soccer. Jerry Zagoda's reporting in the Star Tribune saying that the deal's not done, but Ramsey is the leading candidate, and sounds like they're closing in on him, so I imagine that will be happening sometime soon. Regular season starts in just a few days. Imagine that their interim coach is still going to be leading things during that game Saturday at Austin, Cameron Knowles, but they need to get this done. At some point, they need to get this done. Probably good to get this at least settled if they can before the season starts, get things going. Maybe Knowles takes the first 2 or 3 games while things get up to speed, but an interesting hire, someone coming over from the Premier League, an assistant coach from the Premier League, no real ties to Major League Soccer, but he's definitely got some things going for him. Interesting decision. He'll be younger than 3 or 4 players on the Loons. And just an interesting hire all around. We'll have to find out more about it. We'll have to find out exactly what he plans to do, like attack wise, things like that. But he's 7 years younger. Ramsey's 7 years younger than MLS's next youngest head coach. That's Nick Cushing from New York City FC. He's 39. So interesting. Going from Adrian Heath, who's 63 right now, to a coach basically half his age. Should be a different tactic, different style. That will be interesting to see how that works out for the Loons this season. Like I said, Lavelle E. Neal III and I will talk more about that and other things on Wednesday's show. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.